Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Greenfields Exploration Panel. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with three experienced geologists who have each enjoyed the success of making significant gold discoveries in both Western and Eastern Canada. I'm pleased to introduce Adrian Fleming, CEO and Director of Gold Island, Dr. Rob Carpenter, the co-chairman of Prospector Metals, and Roger Moss, the CEO of Labrador Gold. Our speakers are going to share with us the aspects of how these discoveries were made and why we're calling them the Greenfields case histories. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that you can submit questions at any time using the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of the screen. We're going to try to get to as many as possible after the panel discussion. And as always, this is being recorded and available to watch afterwards on 6.com. But just to kick it off, if each of you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, saying a few words about who you are and your current affiliation. I'll pass it to you, Roger, to kick it off.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Dasha, and thanks to you and Adrian for setting this up. I think it's a good time to be having a discussion like this about Greenfields exploration, and probably not enough being talked about getting back to grassroots, as we also call it. From my part, I am, as you mentioned, the CEO of Labrador Gold Corp, and I'm a geologist. Been working in the mineral exploration industry for many years, and almost entirely in grassroots exploration, including right now with Labrador Gold. My career started in Namibia, where I was fortunate to be involved in a discovery there of the gold mine Nabashab. And from there, moved to Canada, South America, a little bit in Europe, and but now back in Canada, and as you know, out in Newfoundland. And our project, the Newfoundland Kingsway project, it's a grassroots project. We've made a few discoveries there over the last 2 years, and I think we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. But it's really that fundamental grassroots exploration that has enabled us to get to where we are today, where we're drilling a good way, probably about halfway through a 100,000-meter drill program, and with the cash to sustain that going through to the end. So I think the basics of systematic grassroots exploration is one of the things that we're going to talk about, and I think it's obviously. In my career, it's been where I've had the most success, and I think I think we're doing the same thing again now in Newfoundland.
Great, thank you. I look forward to hearing more about that. Dr. Rob, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dasha. So I'm a geologist by trade. I spent most of my early career working for the major companies, primarily in Canada. Gold and also nickel. And I was lucky enough early on to be working for some crews that made some big discoveries. They didn't need me to make it, but I was just lucky enough to be there. And the Hope Bay Belt with BHP, Meliadine with Western Mining. And I was lucky enough as a young geologist to see how these greenfield discoveries were made. And it was quite an addictive experience to see it. And as I grew older into the profession, I decided that was the route I wanted to take as well. I did some academic work, hence the Dr. Rob, I guess. Also, I worked for the government, which is where I met Adrian, actually. And in 2004, I moved to Vancouver, and I met John Robbins of the Discovery Group. And we put together a company called Kaminak Gold Corporation. And the aim of that company was to, again, do greenfields exploration, primarily gold in Canada. And we had some success, and we're lucky enough to be, to make a greenfields discovery. And now I'm with a company called Prospector Metals, and they trade on the TSX Venture Exchange. The symbol is PPP. And I'm co-chairman with Craig Roberts. And Alex Heath is our CEO, and Joe Price is our vice president of exploration. And we have a diverse portfolio of projects, gold and nickel, in Ontario and Quebec, and also in Newfoundland. Our business model is, again, greenfields exploration, primarily trying to replicate what we did at Kaminak. And as Roger had alluded to, Greenfield's exploration is very addictive, and success is sometimes elusive, but it can be quite rewarding.
Great. Thank you so much. And of course, Adrian, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Dasha. And thank you to Roger and to Rob for agreeing to participate today. And the goal of today's get-together is to provide people with a little bit more information, I think, about what Greenfield's exploration really is. And each of us has had the good fortune to be involved in one or more of that kind of discovery. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. However, a little bit about me. I'm an Aussie geologist. I've been in this business heading for 5 decades now. I had the good fortune, I guess, early in my career to work out of Australia with a junior, and then I was hired by Placer Development, very important and esteemed Canadian exploration company, and I worked with Placer in Australia and Papua New Guinea, and also some time in Canada. Then I guess I got back into the junior space with companies in different parts of the world. And I've been lucky enough to be a part of teams, and in some cases leading the team that made significant exploration successes in various places. The first one was the Porgera Gold Project in Papua New Guinea, where when I was up there working, we found the high-grade Zone 7 part of that system, which catapulted it into a very lucrative mining operation, which was subsequently developed. I worked in Western Australia and on something called Big Bell. That became a mine. Spent a bit of time at Hope Bay after and during the time that Rob Carpenter was up there doing some work. Then I spent quite a bit of time in the Guyana Shield of South America with a company called Golden Star. And during my watch, we discovered the Gross Rosabel mine or deposit, which is now has resources and production of something like 15 million ounces. I'm a director of a couple of Canadian-based companies, but I'm also the CEO of Gold Island Inc. That company has a number of prospects in Newfoundland. We're just starting work on those. A bit like Rob and I think Roger, once you've had some success in this business and we're looking for treasure, that success creates, I guess, a bit of an endorphin hit, and you become a bit of an addict because you think, well, the next one, that's going to be the really big one. So that's me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you and welcome. So obviously this panel is about Greenfield's exploration, which each of you are really familiar with. But for those who aren't, what does Greenfield's exploration really mean? And I'll just pass it to whoever wants to answer that.
Rob, go.
Oh, wow. So Greenfields is a bit of a loaded question. An investor might think of a Greenfield project differently than a geologist. But the way I see Greenfield would be, it's essentially new ideas in new areas. So you're fighting dogma and you're going against the grain and you're trying to be first mover into an area. And that takes a lot of guts because you're the one leading the charge. You're not at the back of the pack. It usually involves district scale land positions. So large land positions where you're doing early geochemical surveys or geophysical surveys, trying to zero in to the areas of interest. So it doesn't start with a drill. And investors need to know that. This type of, investors commonly want to get into something where they can drill right away and they want an outcome, yes or no. The Greenfield exploration model is much more technical and it's much more, you have to be a patient investor and you have to be a patient geologist as well. In many ways, it's, you're writing the textbook rather than reading it. And so you have to have a very good team of geologists around you that can interpret information in real time to pivot on what you think is important and isn't important. Is that a good start?
I think it's a great start.
I think that's a very good start.
Roger, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm not sure there's not a lot to add there, but yeah, like I said, most of my career has been spent in Greenfields, grassroots exploration, and I think part of the attraction for me is that it is like a treasure hunt, and you're completely in control. Well, almost completely in control of the outcome. And it's based on science. It's based on the knowledge that you have and the team around you has and what you can put into it. And I think just going, as Rob said, in these large areas, and whether you're looking at geophysics or geochemistry, and obviously the goal of the whole thing is to narrow that area down into the best possible, we call them anomalies, that could then be drill tested. But that does take time. I mean, even in Newfoundland recently, we spent a year doing grassroots exploration before we started drilling. Yeah. And in many cases, as Rob alluded to, investors don't really want to stick around for that long anymore, which is really sad. And I think one of the things that the three of us share or have in common, based on our discussion today, is that we were all introduced to this very early on in our careers. And certainly for me, that made a lasting impression. And how you can get in there and using these techniques that are available, and actually come up with a discovery. And as you say, that's very inspiring and addictive. And I mean, there's a lot has been made of more recent technological advances, and I think I'm open to all technology that I can use to help move that Greenfields exploration ahead. But ultimately, it comes down to your team of geologists or geophysicists that are going to interpret whatever technology it is that you're using, and to come up with the best targets to move forward.
Thank you. Adrian, do you have anything to add?
Yes, just a couple of comments. There's an adage that I heard quite a few times in the early part of my career, which was that the best place to look for a new deposit is within sight of a mining headframe. So there's a mine down there, and if you just look at where maybe you think the trend is, you go along the trend and perhaps you'll find another one. And I think a lot of exploration, certainly from the 1970s, which is when I got into the business, was on the basis of people going out and looking at where other people had found something on the surface. And that is not grassroots exploration. That's following up indications from maybe previous mining or stuff that prospectors have come up with. Grassroots exploration has a conceptual basis because geoscientists and economic geologists like ourselves understand that there are certain geological terrains or types of packages of rocks which host different types of mineral systems. And so, you start off in the case of Rob with nickel. That nickel occurs in particular types of lithology or rocks, and in some cases particular ages of rocks. And so with the advent of computers becoming available in mineral exploration, we've enhanced our ability to compile large amounts of data. And by combining different layers of data and looking at coincidence, you can begin to identify places where perhaps there's never been any exploration done, but the indications from geology and geophysics and the age of the rocks and the tectonic history, the plate tectonic history of the area indicates that might be a fertile place to look for a new mineral occurrence. And it doesn't have to be just gold. It can be copper, it can be nickel, it can be silver, a number of other minerals, even iron ore. And so once you've identified the space where you think there's the possibility of finding something, then you have to move to a very systematic approach where you're doing some kind of grid work. It might be geophysics, it might be geochemistry, it might be a combination, might be just going out and mapping. And that is the approach for Greenfields, which is very different from saying, well, I just learnt that somewhere out there near Kalgoorlie there's an old showing that and some pits that people have forgotten about, and I'm going to go and acquire that property and start doing some work. So it's a more theoretical or conceptual approach to the process of looking for new deposits.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Now I want to take a deeper dive into each of your stories and successes. Starting with you, Adrian, I understand you headed up a company called Underworld Resources that started exploring in the Yukon in 2007. The drill holes that herald the Golden Saddle discovery were drilled in 2008. What took you to the Yukon and what happened?
Yes, thanks. Yes, Underworld Resources was a company that I started with Rob McLeod and Mike Williams from Vancouver. We listed it in 2007. And to begin with, we were doing some exploration in the South Island of New Zealand, and we started looking at opportunities in South America, Chile and Peru in particular. But Rob McLeod came across some systematic soil geochemical work that a guy called Shawn Ryan had been doing south of Dawson City in the Yukon. Rob's a very experienced geologist, good friend and colleague of mine. Rob got very excited about that geochemistry, asked me to have a look at it, and I thought it looked pretty compelling. Ryan had collected some 3,000 soil samples on a grid basis, about an hour's helicopter flight south of Dawson City. And so we liked the look of that. We managed to option the property from him. And in 2007, in our first Yukon field season, we went out and did some mapping, did some trenching. We collected another 1,000 or so samples. And we did some trenching with a little tiny trenching machine that you could move around with a helicopter. And so one of those trenches returned 37 meters at just a bit over a gram. And within that interval, there was 5 gram per ton over 5 meters. Now, unfortunately, the assays didn't come back until very late in the season, so we weren't able to start the drill program till the following year, 2008. So the first drilling took place in 2008. We had identified 5 different targets. We put 1 or 2 holes in each of them. And very fortunately for us, where that trench had returned better than a gram over 37 meters, the first couple of holes there, which were holes 4 and 5, intersected around 20 meters at 4.5 grams per ton from about 14 meters below the surface. So they were the discovery holes. And then we continued with the second phase of drilling. It was the global financial crisis. We were really had our back to the wall to try and raise money. But hole 21 in 2008 returned 50 meters at 3.1 gram per ton at Golden Saddle, and we got quite excited, and that helped us to raise some more money. And in 2009, which was our second phase of drilling, we'd managed to raise about 5 million, and we committed 2 and then 3 drill rigs. And fortunately for us, hole 31 cut 3.5 gram per ton over 100 meters. And that was a stellar hole, hole 31 in the Golden Saddle deposit. We were coming out of the global financial crisis. We managed to raise about another 9 million on the back of that. And by the end of that second year of drilling, we had drilled 60 holes into this deposit. And early 2010, we issued our maiden resource, and that was a touch over 1 million ounces at 3.2 gram per ton. So the pace at which we made a discovery in a trench, and then after 2 seasons of drilling to come up with 1 million ounces is almost unprecedented. I mean, we kept pinching ourselves and saying, are we dreaming? Is this really happening? Because it happened so quickly. And then, of course, at the Prospectors Conference in 2010, the people from Kinross came along and said, we want to buy your company. You've got 24 hours to say yes. And so we thought, what do we do now? We rushed off to our brokers and advisors and said, well, you think we should do this? We were all pretty convinced that we should do it. And Kinross finished up paying a 30% premium to our stock price. I think Kinross offered us $2.58. So all of the people that had bought shares in Underworld Resources made money, and we, the principals, were the recipients of a bit of a windfall. So that's the story of Underworld Resources. And I don't think in the balance of my career I'll have the good fortune to repeat the pace at which that discovery was made, and the success. However, Dasha, there's a black mark against this discovery because it is still not a mine. So some people would say it doesn't count. The property is now owned by a company called White Gold. They've found more there. And I think once additional infrastructure is developed in the Yukon, that will become a mine, and I hope I'm still alive when it happens.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to you, Rob. Kaminak Gold, which you led, was also working in the Yukon, south of Dawson City. The discovery drill holes that found the coffee deposit were drilled in 2010. What is the backstory to that discovery?
Well, I love hearing that story every time, Adrian, and I've heard you tell it, and I've heard Rob tell it, and Jody and others, and I love it every time. I'll be rewatching this one for sure. Kaminak started in 2005, and we were a spin out from a diamond company, and our properties are primarily in Nunavut, British Columbia, and some in Ontario. And we were chewing through these properties, trying to evaluate them. And we were aware of the discovery in the Yukon by Adrian and his group. And we know Rob and Adrian, and they're well-respected people. And we knew that when they started reporting 3 grams over 50 meters, that we should start paying attention. And a gentleman in Vancouver by the name of Cal Everett, who at the time was with PI Financial, had us in our room. And he said, you guys got to go talk to these Underworld guys. And he had some core that Rob and Adrian had given him. And it looked really intriguing to us. Geologically, it looked like nothing we'd ever seen before, which is a good thing. So we kind of put it on the back burner for a few months. We were wondering what to do. And then it was the roundup in 2009 when myself and our chief geologist, Craig Finnegan, walked into a bar and sat down and started talking to a couple other geos we knew. And there was this prospector there waving some samples around in the air. And we introduced ourselves, and he said, "Hi, I'm Shawn Ryan." We said, "Oh, we finally get to meet Shawn Ryan." And our relationship blossomed from there. And less than a month later, we had an agreement on the coffee property, which was adjacent on the other side of the river to Adrian and his group. And Shawn showed us some very compelling surface geochemical data. It smacked of district scale and multiple discoveries, and it had never been drilled before. So in 2009, we did a very extensive trenching program. Again, there was pressure on us to drill it right away, and we didn't. And we spent a year looking at the existing data, doing geophysics, doing structural interpretations, doing more soil chemistry, and doing more trenching, all led by Shawn and his crew at Ground Truth Exploration, primarily a gentleman by the name of Isaac Phage. And if you ever get a chance to work with Isaac, I would do it, but he's really busy, and I'm going to hopefully try to keep him busier. So yeah, we kind of suffered in the markets a little bit because people were expecting us to drill right away. But we drilled our first hole early in 2010, and our first hole was 17 grams over about 15 meters. And our strategy in 2010 was simple. We had a very target-rich environment. So our objective was to try to make as many discoveries as we could over that 30-kilometer property. we weren't doing 5-meter step outs or 10-meter step outs or 20-meter step outs. We were very aggressive. We wanted to make sure that investors understood the real potential and the real value in this project. You have to have smart people, and the key guys behind that discovery. I mentioned Craig Finnegan, Tim Smith, our VP Exploration, Alan Wainwright, Adam Simmons, Roy Kuluktu, very, very great geologists and very great friends as well. And that's one thing that's important. You have to have geos you trust. But that being said, it's not a science experiment. We're here to make money, right? So our job was to not fall in love with any one particular prospect, any one particular zone. And in that summer, we drilled 7 individual gold discoveries across the property, all starting from surface. And our objective was to give the market a real good idea of what the value of that was. So it took a couple of years to put our initial resource together, and that was in the spring of 2013. And I don't remember the exact number, but the number was at least 3 million ounce resource. I can't remember. It might have been 5. Don't quote me on that. My memory's kind of bad. And at that point, my services as a geo were kind of limited. After that, it became more of a, put it into a feasibility stage. And at that point, Ira Thomas took over the company, and she shepherded it very wisely to I think it was a PEA, and the company was bought by Goldcorp in 2016 for $500 million. So not a linear story, and it involved a lot of different people at a lot of different stages. The discoveries are important, the pre-discoveries are important, but also, you drill a hole as a geologist, you have to make sure you have competent people that understand how to put geometry onto zones and make them into deposits. And that's a big challenge that not a lot of geologists get the opportunity to do.
Thank you so much.
Rob, Dasha, can I jump in and just ask Rob a question before we go to Roger? Yeah. So, Rob, you had a lot of geochemistry by Isaac Fage, and that indicated sort of where to go. But what step what was the steps from geochemistry to where you put the first drill holes?
Yeah. So what happened, we knew these things were hosted in fault zones, but we didn't know the geometry of the fault zone. And Isaac was out there just as the snow had fell in late 2009. And it was something about a photo that he took from the helicopter that showed the shadowing, where we could see how the structures just lined up right along a north-south feature. And it was subtle. We walked over it 100 times that summer and couldn't see it. But Isaac said, "Hey, Rob, you guys got to see this photograph I just took. The zones and all of the trench samples line up along this trend." And we drilled it, and that later became the Supremo T3 zone, which I think to this day is still the largest ounce reservoir on that property.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, that's quite incredible, and I think it shows the fact that in this work, serendipity is important as well. Despite all the best science and geology that we do, having that serendipity is vital in some cases.
All right, well, that leads me to you, Roger. Your company, Labrador Gold, began searching for gold in Labrador in 2018, but in 2021, the discovery holes at the high-grade Big Vein mineralization were found in Newfoundland. So from Labrador to Newfoundland, how did that happen? And can you just take us through the events that led to the Big Vein discovery?
Yeah, sure. So again, what we had done previously, prior to even going to Labrador, we had a project in Ontario, which we had done grassroots work on. It was along strike from Probe Mines' Borden Lake discovery, but that work we drilled a few holes testing geophysical anomalies, which hadn't turned out well. And again, partly it was because we tried to rush the drilling to please the investors. So lesson learned there. And but when we didn't find anything, and that was only a 2,500 meter drill program, then we had to look for something else. And one of our backers, a precious metal fund out of the Netherlands, put me in touch with Shawn Ryan, who's a common thread here, and he had had enough of the Yukon by this time apparently, and had started staking in Newfoundland and Labrador, and he had 3 projects in Labrador that he wanted to option, and so I met with Shawn, and we went through it together, and we ended up optioning all 3 of them, and these were huge properties, as Shawn is known for staking very large properties and district scale kind of things, and these were grassroots. I mean, there had been little bits of work on 2 of them. One of them was a greenstone belt, which Shawn staked almost the entirety of, which is, I mean, for those of you that know greenstone belts, that's unheard of. So yeah, I mean, we had a good package of properties to work on, and we worked systematically through them. We ended up with keeping 2, dropping 1, but you know, it just became a struggle raising money on these grassroots exploration plays, even though we were having success with both lots of soil sampling with ground truth and Isaac, and we were progressing them along, but it got to the point in 2019 that we decided that we needed to find something else in order to raise money, something that the market would find a little more exciting. And that, again, the serendipity played a part in that, because in January of 2020, Newfoundland Gold announced their big discovery on their Queensway project. I knew that Shawn also had claims in Newfoundland, and talking to Shawn about that, and through a whole bunch of different pathways and discussions and bidding wars and everything, we managed to end up with the Kingsway project, and that was 2 years ago at the PDAC, in fact, where we signed the deal for that. And you know, again, there'd been quite a lot of work done on this project in Newfoundland, but for me, the key aspect of that project and why we went after it so aggressively was this major structure that ran through the property that seemed to be very closely associated with the gold mineralization that Newfoundland Gold had found, and before them, back in the 90s, Noranda exploration. So there were a whole bunch of gold occurrences sitting adjacent to this major fault zone called the Appleton Fault Zone, and so that's what I wanted to have a part of. And so that was the initial thought. Following that, we did obviously we did it whatever we pulled whatever we could out of the assessment files, and shout out to the Newfoundland government. That system, that online geoscience online system they have, is incredible, and it's one of the best that I've seen in terms of ease of access and ease of use. So a lot of information we got from that on past work, and then we went to work with ground truth again, and we did lots of soil geochemistry, big grids, covered most of those soil grids with ground magnetics and electromagnetics as well. And then we followed up the anomalies with prospecting. And it's like you'll hear again and again that you can't find anything in the West anymore, just sitting on surface. But both two of the discoveries that we made, Big Vein and Golden Glove, in the last 2 years were found by prospecting, following up on soil geochemistry, and we're finding more. So it's prospecting definitely still works, and I think it's one of the ways that you can go from the geochemistry, as to Adrian's point earlier, going from the geochemistry to the drill. You can use geophysics obviously to see where the anomalies are, but if you have prospecting and you find stuff on surface, that's even better, because then you have a pretty good idea where things are, and you can measure the directions of where these things are going and plan your drill holes accordingly. So really it was looking at, as we've talked about, the basic setting, the geological setting of the property, and then getting on the ground and doing that systematic exploration to the point where we're drilling. And fortunately, the drilling worked this time. And it took 14 holes. For us to find visible gold in the drill core at Big Vein. And that was kind of a little nerve-wracking because, as we all know, the turnaround time at the labs was such that we didn't really have much information from the first 13 holes. So we were going on a wing and a prayer and some XRF data. But as you know, it turned out pretty good.
Dasher, I'd like to just pick up a theme that's been mentioned, excuse me, by both Roger and Rob, and this is structure. And structure are cracks in the Earth's surface, and many mineralized systems are associated in one way or another with these faults or shears or cracks in the Earth's surface, because that's where hot fluid can move up and carry minerals up towards the surface. And Rob talked about the photograph, and I do remember that story now. And Roger talked about the Appleton Fault, which is one of a number of great big cracks running through Newfoundland, which is one of the reasons why everybody's excited about exploring in Newfoundland. But there's an element of this with the Golden Saddle discovery. In 2007, our first field season there, I brought a colleague of mine, Greg Corbett, who's a well-known consulting geologist to the property. Had a couple of young geologists there who are doing some mapping and working with the trenching program. And so we were talking with Greg about the structures that might occur in the area where we were working. And so Greg pulls out some maps and things, and then we had a whiteboard, and he's drawing on the whiteboard and saying, well, you've got the Tintina fault structure, which is this big major crack up to the north of where we were working. And he said, what you've got in that trench there, and a couple of the other places where you're working looks interesting, and I think there's going to be some structural control to this mineralization, if there is mineralization there. And I think those structures are going to be dipping off to the north. They might be steeply vertical, but they're probably on an angle. And I think that they're heading towards the north. When we came back in the second field season in 2008, and I said we drilled five different targets. When we drilled at Golden Saddle, we oriented the drill hole to the south because we thought the structure was going to the north. And we only just clipped the edge of what became that system. And had we drilled this way, and had we not had the information from Greg Corbett, we would have missed that discovery. We might have found it eventually, but the first few holes would have missed. So there's these sort of developments, I call them light bulb moments, when all of a sudden somebody comes up with an idea that's really important to the process of discovery. And the other point I would make from this is that it's really critical to have a team of people with different skill sets and different opinions, and you need to foster an environment within your exploration team where everybody has an opportunity to contribute some ideas. And you need to, and if you're leading that group, you need to listen to all those ideas. Some of them will be off the wall, some will be crazy, some of them will be worthwhile. But mineral exploration, like so many other activities that we involve ourselves in, is a team thing. The broader the spectrum of skills and experiences in that team, the better chance you have of finding something.
So, Roger, I love hearing exploration case histories in retrospect. And, you said you hit on hole 14 and you were wondering, what was in hole 1 through 13. So when you were finished hole 13, how many more holes were you going to drill if you didn't find VG?
I had to think about it for a while there because, in the heat of the moment, that wasn't really a factor. We had, what I said is that we had planned 10,000 meters of drilling, Now that was 10,000 meters of big vein, and so I think the 14th hole we were probably somewhere around 3,500, 4,000 meters. So we had a ways to go, and we had the funding in place, more than enough to do what we wanted to do, and given my earlier experience with having drilled like 10 holes and not found anything, I was quite keen to finish the program that we had planned, and so yeah, and it wasn't that we weren't getting encouraging results. I mean, we're seeing alteration, we're seeing lots of quartz veining, mineralization, but we hadn't actually seen any gold in the core, which was kind of what we were hoping for based on our prospecting and the samples that we collected with visible gold. So yeah, I was determined to see the 10,000 meters drilled for sure.
Okay.
But I actually, before we move on, I wanted to go on to one of the things that Adrian mentioned about having a good team with and encouraging ideas to come forward. And I would say often it's the off the wall ideas that actually work out. So they shouldn't be discounted either.
I'm just looking at the time here. We have a lot of really good questions from the attendees, and I want to make sure we can get to some of those. So I'm just going to ask a few of these and then come back if we have time to the questions that I've also prepared. But an attendee, Adrian, is asking, what are the biggest myths in the industry that ought to be dispelled?
Is that a question for me, Dasha?
It's a question. It's like these are all questions it's open, but it's an Adrian who's asking the question, so maybe an Adrian should answer the question.
Okay. I think one of the biggest myths is that discoveries come quickly, and often it takes 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So as Rob mentioned before, it's tough for investors to put money into little companies like ours and then just sit and wait. But exploration often doesn't happen quickly, and people have to be patient.
Yeah.
Any others?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. It's it does take a while, and it's one of those things that happens not just in exploration but everywhere. It's like all of a sudden something happens, and it's like it's an overnight success, but all you see is the success. You don't see the years of work that went into making that discovery or coming up with the next best invention or the next best song or whatever the case may be. So I think that it does take time for sure. The other myth that I would say that's out there and probably needs to be dispelled and relatable to what we're talking about here is that things are only going to be found undercover. That's been said for probably 10 years or more now, probably more than that actually. And that if you're going to be exploring, and perhaps the emphasis there is on big discoveries, big deposits, you're only going to find them undercover because the surface has been swept clean. Well, I don't think that's true, as we're showing in Newfoundland now, and I think elsewhere in Canada especially. Yeah.
I agree with that prospecting can still work, and Labrador Gold is very proof of that. One thing I'll add, and it's not really a myth, but it's more kind of like misconceptions. I'm a geologist and I study gold deposits and I try to find them, but more people ask me what I think the price of gold is going to do than anything else. And I answer by saying, I have no idea. Why are you asking me that? I'm a geologist. I'm not a economist, right? So I think that's a myth, is that investors think that because we can find gold, we understand the gold market. And what I'll say might be a bit controversial, but the price of gold doesn't really matter. If we have funding, if we're getting funded to do our work, it means someone thinks we can make money. And good deposits are found in bear markets. That's very important. You don't need record high gold prices to find big gold deposits. And Adrian's proof of that. And the Kaminak and the Underworld story emerged from a very terrible market. And our two companies did well because of two reasons. One is strong management, but also we had money. We didn't just throw it away at what came, shiny object. Both Underworld and Kaminak were very frugal with how they spent their money. And when a good opportunity came around, a big reason why we were able to work on those is because our competitors had no money because of the downturn. So that would be a myth, is that downturns are great for us because it means you can get bigger land positions. It means things are cheaper. It means prospectors may be a little bit more desperate to do a deal, and no one's paying attention to you. And one of the things you need to succeed as Greenfield is you need to have nobody paying attention to you and staking around you and mucking up what you're trying to do. So in many ways, bear markets are actually what the three of us would probably prefer.
Very interesting.
Agreed.
Another question here. Are Greenfield's exploration skills easily transferable from the precious metal sector to the base metals or battery metals sector, or does a young geologist have to pick a lane?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah.
To all of that?
I think, yeah, like, a magnetometer or a geochemical analysis doesn't care what element you're looking for. And, my advice to a young geologist would be try to learn as many different things as you can. Try to learn gold, or try to learn nickel, or learn zinc, and look at the different models and look at the variations that people use of different tools and how they think about what they're looking at. Like in gold, we're looking for grams per ton, right? Whereas so 10 grams per ton in our game is big. But if you're looking for zinc, you need 80,000 ppm. So it's a scale, many orders of magnitude more. So I would suggest to any young geologist, get in the field and work with people who know how to make discoveries or have success, be in a good environment, and try to see as many different things as you could see. One of my professors at university, Bob Hodder, told me, he said, Carp, you're only going to be as good as the rocks that you've seen. And it's something that, is stuck with me since I was 19 years old, and it's absolutely true.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, I think Rob kind of hit it on the nail there. Like, as a young geologist, if you're working in a greenstone belt, there are all kinds of mineral deposit models that can be that can show up in that greenstone belt. You've got nickel, you've got gold, you've got base metals. You probably got others, iron ore. Like, all of these things can be in the same greenstone belt and are commonly. So if you're working on a big land package, your company or the focus may be gold, but in the back of your mind, you also need to know that nickel occurs in komatiites, which may be in the greenstone belt, and that base metal VMS deposits occur in the felsic volcanics, which may be off to the side. So, I think working in those environments, you almost have to have the knowledge of all of those kinds of things, even though you may be specifically targeting one of the commodities.
My only other comment for the young geologist, if you're out there, is don't be afraid to learn about the business side, about the selling of the shares and the stocks and how money is raised. Because the reality is, as a young geologist or any geologist, you really are the one that understands the true value of what's in the ground. And if you don't have a geological background, a salesperson or a businessman doesn't have that inside card that you have. And don't be intimidated by people that are from the business side. For many, many years, I thought, I could never do that, right? And then I'd met John Robbins, and he said, well, Rob, it's actually not that hard, especially if you're a geologist. Here are some things you need to learn, and here are some people that can teach you. So learn as much as rocks as you can, but don't be afraid of the business side, because all of these discoveries are made by people just like you.
Okay. Thank you. We have a bunch of questions here. So David's asking, across the junior exploration space, there's a growing number of patient investors. What are the tells, the metrics, the events that an investor would look for to take their loss and move on, regardless of how favorable the project appears? For example, how long can you hold on to a claim in Canada without advancing a project because of lack of funding?
That's a big question.
It sure is. I can answer the bit about the claims in Canada. And basically, in most jurisdictions, you have to pay every year, or you have to do a certain amount of work every year in order to keep the claims in good standing for another year. Now, if you happen to do a lot of work in 1 year, then that gets added on. So you can, if you did a big sort of airborne survey, for example, that'll probably cover your costs for several years. Same with drilling. So, but year to year, you do have to keep the claims in good standing.
Dasha, I would say, in addition to that, if investors are putting money into the Greenfields exploration space, most companies doing that are for big packages of land. And one of the measures of whether the company is actually making progress is to see that they're continuing to shrink the area, because the goal is to start off with a big area and then keep doing work to eliminate all the area that you think doesn't have anything in it.
All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. Thank you. Jordan is asking, what are the usual steps that you would undertake to ensure success with your greenfield?
Ensure success, that's a loaded question. One in several thousand ideas ever becomes a mine or a prospect. So I prefer the de-risk phrase. So we want to de-risk it. And you have to de-risk it geologically. You have to make sure that there's no red flags. And the sooner you can find where the red flag is, the sooner you can decide whether or not you want to be there or not. Geological red flags often aren't apparent until you see them. Other red flags could be more obvious to someone early on. It could be social economic areas. Is the area you want to explore in an area where permits have been denied by regulatory agencies before? Is there a social license that needs to be acquired there that might be beyond your means? So, I think ensuring success is a tough one. If I could do that, boy, I'd be a happy guy. But, ensuring that the risk stays in the rock is really what the answer is. The rocks don't lie, and you just got to look at that information and say, is it move forward or move on? And I think, a lot of really smart geologists are good at allocating capital and spending it. But sometimes geologists get a little married to their projects and they don't know when to stop spending money. Or investors will say, don't stop spending money, keep going, keep going, keep going. And so those can be some of the challenges as well. But to ensure success, boy, I wish I knew how to do that.
Yeah, I would just add to Rob's comment there. It's, it is hard to be successful in greenfields exploration. And so investors should not be too upset if a geologist does decide this isn't working, I'm moving on. It's way better than taking more money and spending it on things that are probably not going to work out. So, the best idea is to work through what we've been talking about during this webinar, all the different systematic exploration stages, and then every one of them has a decision point. And at that decision point, you say yes or no. And if it's yes, you carry on. If it's no, you walk away. And that should not reflect badly on the management of the company, because essentially, in the end, they're going to be saving investors money.
Dasha, I see a comment from Hamish Sanderman, who's with the Newfoundland Geological Survey, and he's saying all investors in greenfield space should look at companies that have a strong technical team. I think that's one of the things we've mentioned already. A diversity in your technical team and good skills.
Yeah. I know we're a few minutes before we have to wrap up, but we have another question here that I think is interesting. Has the technology used by Greenfields explorers changed much over the years? And are there any significant improvements becoming available in the near future?
Technology continues to advance, and in my 40-odd years in the business, when I started, we didn't have laptop computers. There's a plethora of new techniques and methodologies that continue to evolve, which helps us to be successful.
Yeah, one of the technologies is LiDAR, which is airborne, a very like centimeter scale resolution topography. And remember, in 2010, Isaac Fage from a helicopter saw a shadow. LiDAR would have picked that up pretty quickly, and that technology wasn't available then. And that's really good at identifying the key structures that Adrian had mentioned. And another thing that LiDAR is very good for as well is, the old timers did a lot of trenches, and they'd blow stuff up, like, sometimes it'd be the size of a small car or whatever. And through the years, those get overgrown. But LiDAR can find that. And the old reports, not everyone wanted to share their information back then. So, the LiDAR, among other things, can help you identify where key previous work had been. So, yeah, there are some technological advances, but, you got to use them to put boots on the ground, to go get hammers on rocks. You can't use technology to, enhance technology. If you don't use it to get hammers on rocks, then it's really wasted.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Okay. Well, we are approaching the end, so I just wanted to thank you so much. I feel like we could have talked for another hour. We didn't get to all the questions that I wanted to cover, but there were so many from the attendees. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. Thank you for everyone who attended today and asked all these great questions. If you do have any follow-up questions after this panel, feel free to reach out to any of these men here, and I'm sure they'll be happy to follow up with you directly. You can also find more information on their website. And of course, a recording of this panel will be live on 6.com, so you can rewatch it and share it amongst your friends. But thank you all so much for taking the time today, and hope you have a great rest of your day.